Hey, it's Huck. How the hell are you? Well, you know what? I want to apologize to all of you out there. It has been weeks since I have posted a video on either of my two channels. And I feel bad about that. I mean, you know, old Huck has kind of fallen on some hard times here recently, but hey, we're digging ourselves out of that hole, and you know what? This is just the start of things to come here. A brand new video today. And I know, you know, typically, now this video is going to kind of take a diversion a little bit. I mean, normally, when I post videos to this channel, they have, you know, generally followed some type of political topic. And when I originally, you know, intended this channel, my second channel, you know, I intended it as kind of a news and politics channel. You know, hopefully, you know, thinking that, well, you know, aside from, you know, politics per se, I could once in a while, you know, upload a video about any topic in the news that, you know, might be of, you know, some particular interest at any given time. But today, if you lived in Northeast Ohio where I do, and based on what I've been seeing on ESPN the last 48 hours, apparently this is true well beyond Northeast Ohio. I mean, I've never seen Cleveland get so much attention as, you know, what we've seen since the Browns this past weekend decided to insert Johnny Manziel into the closing, you know, fourth quarter of a losing cause against the Buffalo Bills. Now, you would think Johnny Manziel was the second coming of Jesus Christ himself, but that's another story. The point is, right now, the biggest news in Cleveland is who's going to be the starter this week when the Cleveland Browns, who are 7-5 and really at the tail end of a whole host of teams trying to get into the playoffs, but, you know, still alive. But, you know, they have been going with this Brian Hoyer all season long, and the truth is, for the last 3 or 4 weeks, Hoyer has looked like shit. And Manziel comes in the fourth quarter. They're down 20-3, and within like a minute and a half, he drives them 80 yards and scores a touchdown, and suddenly they're almost back in the game. And if the fucking Browns defense could actually stop a running back once in a while, they might have actually had a chance to let him get back on the field and maybe make a real run at that game. But, you know, hey, you can't have everything. So apparently, there's all this pressure on the coaching staff of what to do with the remaining 4 games left in the season. Now, here's the thing you got to understand about Cleveland. I don't know, maybe some folks just haven't looked at it this way. The Browns don't really have a realistic opportunity to make the playoffs. They basically got one shot at it. And I'll tell you why. At the end of the season, each of the division leaders in the AFC North, the AFC South, the AFC East and West, the division leader is going to make the playoffs. And then on top of those 4 division leaders, they'll take the next best 2 teams. The 2 teams with the next best records will get in. Well, now, right now, Cleveland is a game and a half behind Cincinnati for that division. And, you know, with 4 games left, it's possible, you know, that Cleveland could overtake them. But I wouldn't say it's probable, although Cincinnati has a very tough schedule. The problem is, let's say they don't get that. Let's say they don't win their division. Well, then, the only other way the Browns could get in would be as one of those 2 wild card teams. And right now, there are about 7 teams in the AFC that are all kind of even with, you know, similar 7-5 records as the Browns have right now. And only 2 of them are going to get in. 5 of them are not. And I don't like the Browns' chances, not just because of who they have to play, and their schedule's not easy, but because even if they end up with a tie with any of those other teams at the end of the year to try to decide, you know, which one's going to go, well, the NFL uses this complicated, you know, formula for breaking ties. And according to pretty much any of the tiebreaker formulas that I can figure out, like conference record or head-to-head competition, the Browns have looked pretty lousy against other AFC teams this year, and they're probably going to lose any tiebreaker. And that's just the reality. So realistically, if you're a Browns fan and you're holding out hope that the Browns are going to somehow get into the playoffs with a 7-5 record today, well, let me tell you, the next 4 games are against Indianapolis, one of the better teams in the National Football League. Then they got to play Cincinnati, a team that they kicked Cincinnati's ass the last time they played them. But the truth is, Cincinnati's going to want to have some revenge. Now that's an important game because Cincinnati's leading that division by a game and a half, and a win over the Bengals, again, go a long way towards giving Cleveland some real hope. But not if they don't win these other games. Now they got 2 games after that to complete the season. One is against the Carolina Panthers, a 3-8 team, and it seems like the Browns play, better against the better teams, and then they play really lousy against the lousy teams. And so, you can't take that as a gimme because the Browns have already lost to Houston. They nearly lost and probably should have lost to Arizona. They nearly lost to Oakland. So all of the really poor teams that they've played this year, they've actually played their worst games. So I don't know what will happen against Carolina, but, factor in that is the easiest team they have left to play. They finished the season with a big game against Baltimore. And I'll tell you, that's no picnic. So what we've got here is, realistically, the Browns probably have to win all 4 games in order to assure themselves that they could get in. Because even if they win 3 of the 4, which is an extremely tall order when you're talking about you don't even know what quarterback you're going to play, even if they somehow manage to pull 3 out of 4 wins in their last 4 games, the way I see it, they probably can't win the tiebreakers against any of the other teams that will end up 10-5 that they'll be in competition with to try to get that playoff spot. So realistically, they're pretty much going to have to run the table. So the Browns have a tough decision to make. What quarterback? Brian Hoyer, who's got them at least to where they are, or do they go with the new guy, Johnny Manziel, Johnny Football, and take a shot at seeing what he can make happen on the football field? Now, fans here in Northeast Ohio are going nuts after finally, 11 games into the season, Johnny Manziel finally gets a shot at showing what he could do. And, well, he didn't disappoint. I'll tell you what, after slugging themselves through 3 quarters where the defense played one of their best games. I mean, I think at the point where Manziel got into the game, with about 12 minutes to go in the 4th quarter, the Browns had only scored 3 points. They had got down to about the 10-yard line, and they failed to move the ball beyond that point. It's not because they didn't have opportunities. 3 other times in the game, they got down in or near the red zone, but they couldn't even get a field goal. And this has been the problem with Brian Hoyer of late. In fact, you go back over the last 4 or 5 games, the Browns have led the NFL with 17 takeaways. And out of those 17 takeaways, turnovers in their favor, they've only been able to convert a few of those into scores. And that's just not getting the job done. Browns have had a lot of injuries on defense, and it's kind of decimated their ability to stop the run, particularly late in games. One of the reasons the Browns won the games they did was because early in the year, they were able to run the ball really effectively. And Hoyer is a very good quarterback if you give him a very good running game, because then most of his passes come off of play action. You got a good running game, the linebackers, the safeties all bite on play fakes, and suddenly he's got plenty of time to pass and a number of open receivers, or at least there's no double coverage out there, so he's got receivers out there one-on-one. A couple of things have hampered that attack in the last 4 or 5 weeks, and it started with when the Browns lost their all-pro center, Alex Mack, about 5 or 6 weeks back. And I'll tell you what, the Browns' running game has suffered dramatically since his loss. he was not just an all-pro center, but he calls all the offensive, line shifts and adjustments, during the game. And when they lost that guy, well, it took 2 or 3 weeks for their backup center, this guy Nick McDonald, to finally kind of get a feel for what he was going to have to do out there. And they didn't really produce. I think at one point they were averaging over 150 yards a game rushing. When Alex Mack went out of the lineup, suddenly with Nick McDonald in there and being a little overwhelmed, I think, they started averaging less than 50 yards a game rushing. This put a lot more pressure on the quarterback. And Hoyer, not having, the luxury of people respecting the running game, they were able to pin their ears back and come after him a lot harder. He didn't have the time. He didn't have the wide open receivers he was having before. And frankly, he was getting beat up. Beat up, I tell you. I think maybe Hoyer's even had maybe a slight injury that's affecting his throwing arm. So I think Hoyer is a victim as much of, the injuries on their offensive line and their lack of a running game as he is for, any other aspect of his game that's causing him suddenly to be what he once was, which was a quarterback earlier this year that never made mistakes and had plenty of time when he went back to throw because he had a running game, to suddenly a guy who's running for his life back there with no time to throw and double covered receivers, and suddenly, he's throwing it into traffic, he's forcing balls. They just got one of the best receivers in the NFL back in their lineup last week. Josh Gordon served a 10-game suspension for, I think it was a second or third drug offense or whatever it was. Now, this is one of the truly great receivers in the NFL. Last year, in playing only 14 out of 16 games, he led the NFL in receiving with like 1,600 yards or some crazy shit. This year, now you get him back in the lineup, and I'll tell you what, Hoyer was like a, kid under the Christmas tree. He couldn't throw the ball to Josh Gordon enough. Problem was, they're not on the same page, and he was forcing throws in there. He did it again against Buffalo. The rest of the season, with Gordon not in the lineup, Hoyer was had to be a little bit more careful and really did go through his progressions and threw the ball to the open man. One of the leading receivers for the Browns this year is their slot receiver, this guy, Andrew Hawkins. Now, Hawkins has been sensational this year, and he's had some really big plays. But the truth is, he's not getting the ball anymore. Now that Gordon's in the lineup, it's like Hoyer is just thinking, I got to get the guy to my superstar because he'll make something happen. Well, it ain't happening. So finally, after 3 quarters of nothing happening and Hoyer forcing in a few balls he probably shouldn't have thrown and throwing his second interception of the day, finally, first-year head coach Mike Pettin, who I have a lot of respect for, finally made the tough decision and said, okay, let's give our, first-round draft pick Johnny Manziel an opportunity. And what did Manziel do? Well, I don't need to tell you. You probably saw the highlights. Well, here they are.
Going to keep it. And run out of bounds. That'll be about a 2-yard gain. 2nd and 7. Manziel rolling, throws, complete. This is Miles Austin, and Austin trying to leap over a defender and got undercut. Takes a quick look at the play clock. Over the middle, got his man. That's complete inside the 40-yard line. Josh Gordon holding on to it, throwing, and just off the fingertips of Travis Benjamin. 2nd and 10. Over the middle. Complete! Inside the 15-yard line is Jim Drake. He needs the 2-yard line for a first down. Manziel on the move. Gonna run it up the middle towards the end zone. Touchdown!
Now, I'll tell you, the decision that the Browns coaching staff has to make right now is not an easy one. You're going into some of the top teams of the NFL these last 4 weeks, and you're going to ask yourself to play a rookie quarterback who's never started an NFL game before. Now, I know that Johnny Manziel is exciting, and I know that he can scramble, and he has got a cannon of an arm. something that's surprising a lot of folks that maybe really didn't pay a lot of attention to some of his other attributes back when he was playing for A&M. But the truth is, this guy's got a rocket launcher on his right shoulder. And he showed that last week. So I don't think there's any question this guy's got some skills. But does he have the knowledge? Can he recognize, defensive formations and coverages? Is he going to be able to pick out, or are they going to be able to disguise the defenses they're going to go into? Or is he going to be able to pick up, where the blitz is coming from? All those little nuanced things that generally only comes with a little of, hard-earned experience. Or do you go with the guy who has some experience, who's been a long-time backup quarterback under Tom Brady, who knows how to study film, who always comes into a game prepared, and, say what you will about Brian Hoyer, his arm, or anything else you want to criticize. The fact is, this guy generally, at least early in this season, generally knows where to throw the ball, gets rid of the ball before he gets into any serious trouble. That's a dilemma that the Browns have to deal with. The fact is, Hoyer doesn't have the mobility. He tore his ACL last year, and it's frankly, I think, a miracle that he was able to start this season and produce as well as he has. But he has lost some of the mobility that he had last year. I have not seen Hoyer really scramble out of the pocket, to pick up a first down or to get out of bounds or any of those kind of things that you typically expect, a relatively mobile quarterback to do. Now, they will roll him out of the pocket and let him make a play, but they don't really expect him, to go running for his life and trying to pick up the first down when, the pocket collapses around him. And that's why he's gotten beaten up. And I really think that he's lost a lot of velocity off his arm this last few games. You can see it in the passes that he throws. So I suspect that maybe the last couple of games, Brian Hoyer has been maybe nursing a nagging injury of some sort that's kind of plaguing his ability to put a lot of velocity on the ball. But he's not going to tell anybody about it because he's not about to put himself in a position where he could potentially lose his job to, Johnny Football sitting on the bench that everybody's hankering to go see. So what would I do if I was Mike Pettin, the head coach of the Cleveland Browns? I don't think there's any question. At this point, unfortunately for Brian Hoyer, who I think is one tough guy, and I think if he was 100% healthy and they had the running game, he would be the guy. But right now, given the complete set of circumstances the Browns are dealing with, you got to go with Manziel. I don't know that that gives you a better chance of winning 4 games in a row or even one of those 4 games. But I do know this. Based on what we've seen Hoyer able to produce these last few weeks, he's not getting the job done. You got to do something. Manziel at least has legs. And boy, does he have legs. I mean, this kid is quick. You don't have to watch the highlight films of his, career at Texas A&M to show you that this kid is actually magic. I mean, I have not seen anybody move out of impossible situations back in the pocket like Johnny Manziel. The only person that comes to mind really are maybe Braxton Miller when he played for Ohio State before he got injured last year. Or, you'd have to go back all the way to, Fran Tarkenton of the Minnesota Vikings way back in the, in the golden days of the 60s and 70s. I mean, this kid has a knack for sniffing out trouble and getting away from it. And he can make plays when he's moving like that. He doesn't always just take off running. Now, I don't know. I think, now I'll be honest with you, you put Manziel in there, you're going to have to take the bad with the good. I think he's going to create plays out of nothing, and unfortunately, without a running game, too often, these last 3 or 4 games, that's exactly what the Browns have been, giving their quarterback. A lot of nothing to work with. But he can probably make something happen out of that. He's going to be moving around and running around and scrambling around when they do rush him, and he's either going to take off on some runs or he's going to be able to maybe buy enough time to get a receiver open, and he's probably going to make some big plays. Right now, that's what they need. Their defense last week played well enough to win. Had it not been for the 2 turnovers, a costly fumble that really turned that game around, and the 2 interceptions that Hoyer threw, the Browns were still in that game. So if you can get a little offense going, they potentially could still win these games. Now, I don't know about Indianapolis. Indianapolis right now is on a roll. They scored like 38 points last week, and I don't think they're going to have a whole lot of trouble scoring some points against a, pretty decimated Cleveland Browns team right now. So the Browns are going to have to score some points if they have any chance of winning that game. And I don't mean like 10 points or 17 points. I'm talking like 28 points or maybe 35 points. And the fact is, if you just look at that fact, there's no way Brian Hoyer is going to score 35 points. It just isn't going to happen at this point with all of the lack of tools he has around him in the running game. Manziel, I guess we'll see. So, I don't know what your opinion is, or if you even have an opinion. I'm sure you probably have your own favorite team in the NFL, if you even watch the NFL. And it's probably not the Browns. And for that, well, you probably have a whole lot less sleepless nights than I do. So congratulations on that. But if you do have an opinion, and it seems, if ESPN is any indication, everybody does, I'd love to hear what you would do if you were the Browns head coach, Mike Pettin, and you had this, awful decision to make here with 4 games left and the playoffs on the line. So it's been a long time since the Browns, this late in the year, have actually had any shot, or have even, had the word playoffs in any legitimate conversation. But the Browns are still relevant. And so this is a huge decision for the coaching staff to make. Now, one other little factor, I think, comes to play in all of this. Now, the Browns had taken Hoyer out of the game last week, and they put, Manziel back in. And I think, it'd be easy for the Browns to say, after we've looked at everything and considered all of, the many different angles of this, we're going to stick with the veteran. We're going to stick with Hoyer because we think he gives us the best chance to win, based on his experience, based on his ability to study film and, know tendencies and recognize this and that and all of that. And that, then that's legitimate. That would be a legitimate way to go. And I really couldn't argue with that. But here's the catch. You've already pulled Hoyer out of one game. And you've finally let the backup go in. So if you go ahead and you start Hoyer in this game, coming up here against the Colts, what happens if, early in the game he throws an interception? What happens if, after the first quarter they haven't moved the ball at all? I mean, are you going to have to worry about Hoyer looking over his shoulder on every play, every drive, that if I don't perform, I'm coming out of the game? Is he going to be able to perform under that kind of pressure? And at what point do you finally take him out and put Manziel in? After the first bad drive? After the first pick? After the first quarter, the first half? I mean, all through that game, Hoyer's going to be second-guessed every step of the way. That's one of the reasons why I think at this point, you pretty much almost have to go with Manziel and say, you know what? We're going to put it in your hands. Let's see. Let's see what we drafted. Let's see what we got. Now, at the end of this season, regardless of what the Browns do or don't achieve, at the end of this season, the Browns are going to have a big decision to make. They've got not one, but due to some trades, they've got 2 number 1 draft picks. 2. They're going to have 2 picks in the first round next year. And they're going to have to make a quarterback decision. Hoyer is a free agent after this year. And thus far, the Browns have not made any commitment to signing him to a new contract. They have said all along that they're going to wait until the end of the year and make an evaluation based on a whole year's worth of work. Now, it's worth noting that when he came off the bench last year as the backup and was injected as a starter, he won 2 games that he started and really effectively won the 3rd game that he started, in which he got injured a portion of the way through the game and ended his season last year. So, combined with the 7 wins and 5 losses that he has led the Browns to this year, and those 3 wins, technically, that he, led them in last year, you're talking about a quarterback that has led this Browns team to 10 wins and 5 losses. And this is a Browns team, I remind you, that for the last 10 years has had only 1 winning season. One of the many considerations the Browns probably have to kind of deal with here is that, at the end of this season, regardless of what the Browns achieve or don't achieve this year as far as wins and losses in the playoffs are concerned, is that they pretty much need to know going into next year of what they're going to do about their quarterback situation. Now, the Browns have kind of been the landfill of quarterbacks since they've come back into the league in 1999. They have drafted more quarterbacks and failed to produce anything out of it. I think, I can't think of another team that has gone through something like 23 quarterbacks that they have, started or drafted. And in most cases are no longer even in the league anymore. So the Browns, yet again, this past year, used a first-round draft pick, in fact, traded up to get Johnny Manziel. And he's always been controversial. A lot of people think he's too small. A lot of people think he's going to get hurt, due to the style and the running that he does. The truth is, I've gone back and I've looked over some of his, highlight tapes. I've looked over, some of his stats. This guy's got a cannon for an arm that a lot of people overlook. Not only that, he's a much more effective pocket passer than he is even when he rolls out and runs. His completion percentage in the pocket was actually better than virtually any of the other quarterbacks that came out of the draft last year. And that's something that I think most people don't realize. He can be a very effective pocket quarterback if you can buy him some time. The thing is, when he played for A&M had a defense that was shredded, like it was made out of, cheddar cheese. And he had to make plays. They had to score virtually every time they had the ball. And, he scrambled a lot. He did it with his legs, he did it with his arms, he did it any way he had to. There were times when he'd make mistakes and he'd have to make up for it. And it just seemed time after time he did. But that's college. Now he's in the pros. And I think like any quarterback in the pros, you've got to have some kind of an offensive line that's going to protect you if you're going to sit back in the pocket. Hoyer has shown in the last 3 or 4 games that the offensive line of the Cleveland Browns isn't adequate to always protect him. And he's taken a beating. And he's forced some throws, tried to get rid of the ball, and basically, because of his lack of mobility, things haven't gone so well. It's the one asset that Manziel brings to the table that could compensate for all of the things that he lacks, basically experience. But the Browns still don't know if he's the guy. And without playing him and giving him an honest shot to see what he can do at this level of football, they really are no further ahead knowing whether or not Manziel is the guy of the future, or whether maybe next year they got to spend one of those 2 first-round draft choices to get a quarterback that is the guy of the future. Because regardless of how you feel about Hoyer, I think it's pretty clear that Hoyer's probably not the guy. He may be a great backup quarterback. He may be able to take you if everything, if all the pieces are fit together really well. He may be able to lead you. I can remember years ago when the Dolphins went undefeated. And what people often forget about that undefeated season, the last undefeated season in the NFL, way back in 1972, was that their quarterback back then, Brian Griese, got hurt just before the playoffs. And it was their backup quarterback, Earl Morrall, who led them to many of their playoff victories before they actually ended up getting into the Super Bowl, and Griese came back and led them to victory. Now, nobody, even then, would have suggested that Earl Morrall should have been, a starting quarterback, for the Miami Dolphins, or probably most other teams for that matter. But the Dolphins were good enough that if he played a smart game with his experience, he was able to do all the things you needed to do, to win in the National Football League. But you probably weren't going to have to depend on him, to pull the game out week after week, or, get into some kind of high scoring affair like, Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady can do, or, Peyton Manning can do. He's just not that type of quarterback. And I don't think Hoyer is either. I mean, if you need to get into a shootout, I don't know that Hoyer's your guy, So, right now, the Browns have to decide whether or not they even have a guy on their roster this year that is that guy of the future. I think this last 4 games of the year are going to give them a pretty good idea of whether or not Manziel has those qualities, or whether or not maybe they're going to have to keep looking. Now, I don't think that's why they should start him. I think right now, when you're in the hunt for the playoffs, you've got to be concerned about one thing and one thing only. Who gives us the best chance to win this game we're going to play this week? And it really shouldn't go any further than that at this point. Now, it'd be different if the Browns were out of it. But as of right now, they're not. And so I think the decision has to be made on that basis and that basis alone. Who's going to give us the best opportunity to win this game? Forget everything else. That's why it's such a tough decision. I'd like to hear your opinion. Hey, thanks for watching. I'll try to get back to politics next time I post a video. You hang in there. I'm doing my best.